And now, please welcome civil rights activist DeRay Mckesson.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. Just like Mindy, I don't know how inspirational I am today because the world seems to be falling apart around us, but I do have some thoughts about the internet that I'll share. I'll start by saying that the officer, Jason Stockley, shot Anthony 5 times, that he approached his car and he said that Anthony had a gun. The prosecutor in the case said that the officer planted the gun. And the dash cam camera, on the dash cam, the officer is quoted as saying, "I'm gonna kill this mother effer." And his lawyer described this statement as mere human emotion in the context of a dangerous moment. In the acquittal, the judge wrote, "Finally, the court observes, based on its nearly 30 years on the bench, that an urban heroin dealer not in possession of a firearm would be an anomaly." And people often ask me, when is it okay for the police to kill somebody? That they feel like the protesters were in the street and that we have been sort of pushing and fighting against the police. And they say, well, when is it okay? And my only response to them is always, when is it okay for the police to kill your child? And it's in this context that I think about what we talk about when we talk about free speech. That when I think about standing in the middle of the street, it is always because for the protesters, it was this question of how am I supposed to respond to murder? What is it supposed to be? How should I be upset by the fact that people are dead and they should be alive today? That people forget about Ferguson in the initial wave of the protests, that it was illegal to stand still in August, September, and October of 2014, that if we stood still for more than 5 seconds, we were immediately arrested. So if you ever saw us on the news marching, it wasn't because we thought marching was like this incredible tactic and we were trying to be in solidarity with the civil rights movement. It was because if we stood still, we would be arrested. And we took them to court. I was a plaintiff in that case and we got it overturned, but it was illegal to stand still in 2014. So when people talk to me about this beautiful free speech, I ask, where is it? Because we didn't see it. We didn't have that amazing right to speak and do what we wanted in those early days. And I would argue in many places across the country, the protesters don't have it anymore. You think about Charlottesville, is that we were arrested for standing still, is that the white supremacists in Charlottesville literally were pushing the police. They were like pushing the police officers and nothing happened. When I talked to Terry McAuliffe, the governor of Virginia, afterwards, he said, DeRay, well, they had stockpiles of weapons hidden throughout the city. And I'm like, well, that seems like even more reason to me to arrest them, right? Whereas we came in the street armed with cell phones and the truth, and we were taken to jail time and time again. Now, this issue is personal to me because I am the reason that Chuck Johnson, the first person ever to be permanently banned from Twitter, he was banned for saying that he was raising money to take me out. I was once doing a talk back at a movie theater in Baltimore, and somebody tweeted in a death threat. And in the middle of the movie, the police came. They shut down the movie theater at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon because they were concerned about people's safety. So it is in that vein that I'll offer a few thoughts about the internet. The first is that I'm mindful that it just moves so quick. So you think about Vine. Vine was the only video platform that we had when the protests began. If we couldn't put it in 6 seconds, it was not getting on the internet. And now Vine doesn't even exist anymore. I remember when Jack and the folks at Twitter decided to buy Periscope. We were in like the first 30 users of Periscope before Twitter even bought it. But before Periscope, it was like Ustream and Livestream were the only platforms that we were using to talk and show people what the protests were. There was no Twitter video. You couldn't upload video in those early days. Like it was literally just Vine. So when I think about what the future looks like, it's like I hope I can't imagine what 10 years looks like, because I couldn't even tell you what 3 years look like. Like it just changed so quickly. What I will say is I'm interested to see what the first platform is that people actually learn from, like learn skills on, like a major social media platform. Right now, most of the platforms are about building community and sharing information, just like sharing knowledge, not necessarily skill building. And I don't think we have a platform yet that is allowing people to sort of build skills, like to learn skills and not just information. Now, I think about this issue of erasure, that erasure often manifests in 2 ways. One is that either the story is never told or is told by everybody but us. And what we saw so powerfully in the protests is that we became our own storytellers. That in those early days that the police, I remember being at one protest and the chief of police at the time, he was like, the protesters threw rocks at him. And we're sitting here like, if we threw rocks at you, we all be dead. Like it wouldn't even be a conversation, right? Like it would be really clear if we'd actually thrown rocks at you. But what was powerful is that in that moment, we could immediately say like, that didn't happen. And we had the power to do that in a way that just didn't exist before. Now, when I think about this, there is a question of who's responsible for the consequences. That if people have the right to say whatever they want to say, then there might be consequences. And I've seen that applied disproportionately, disadvantageously to people of color. That I've seen people of color like yell one thing, say one thing, and it's like they're carted off to jail. And Charlottesville, to me, is probably the most stark example of like literally these are like armed white people pushing the police, which is still wild. Every time I say it, I'm like, they pushed the police. That they actually pushed the police officers and like nothing happened. And it's questions of like, who manages the consequences and how do we have an honest conversation about them is something that I hope that as we go forward, like that changes. I'm always mindful of the way that white supremacy performs innocence. And I think that like the alt-right, even the label of the alt-right is a performance of innocence, that you take the KKK to the White Citizens Council to the alt-right, that the idea is actually the same idea, that the idea hasn't changed, but what the labels do is it allows the performance of innocence in a way that allows people to say like, oh, these are like, two sides of the same coin. And it's like, I didn't come outside with a gun. I didn't come outside saying that like other people's lives weren't worth anything. I came outside saying like Mike Brown should be alive. That was it. That was a truth that we carried with us. And that to equivocate as if we are synonymous with the white supremacists only is allowable when they become these innocent people who just have ideas. And people should be able to like have ideas in this world. What we know to be true is that ideas have consequences, and that ideas often have consequences for the most marginalized, that the way that they impact the most marginalized just changes so much. Then there's a question of who decides what is free, who decides what freedom is, and who decides where to speak. It's always interesting when I talk about the protest. People will be like, well, there are some cities where like you can't yell, and you're like, well, I thought I could speak freely. And it's like, well, you can't scream at people. It's like, well, I thought I could speak the way I wanted to. Or like, you can't be outside of people's homes at 3 a.m. It's like, but I thought I could speak the way I wanted to. It's like, is it really free speech if I have to stand in that corner 10,000 feet away from like the target of the conversation I'm trying to have? Shutting things down, whether you like it or not, to me seems like this free speech is possible. That like yelling over somebody, whether you agree with the tactic or not, seems to me to be in line with this idea of free speech that people talk about. And I'm interested too in the way that sometimes our best intentions change the way that tech platforms show up. I recently met with the Google Doodle team, the people that make the Google Doodles, who are great, they're awesome. And one of the things that they talked about was how when they first started, they had a couple rules. And one of the rules was that they only celebrated people on their birthday, and they only celebrated birthdays, and they only celebrated people at the top of their field. And one of the unintended consequences of only celebrating birthdays is that it almost excluded wholly any slave, because there were all these people who like didn't have birth certificates, so they didn't know their birthdays, so they just weren't represented in the tech platform. And I bring that up because there are ways that sometimes we make our best intentioned decisions on tech platforms and don't realize that the repercussion means that so many people have become invisible because of those decisions. Now, what is interesting about social media, specifically in this moment, is that people have now figured out how to become famous off of these platforms, and you get people more addicted to being famous than being free. And I think that we will see this play out over the next couple of years as like how we filter who we follow, I think will become more nuanced. And I think that in a world where everybody's a content creator, as people have talked about, that content creation actually won't be what gives people power in this moment anymore. I think that the curators will be the new power brokers, that the people who filter the way that we interact in the world will be the people that we look to who will hold the most power in the digital space. Now, the last two things that I'll say is that the crowd, I believe, tends towards the center. That the more and more people that get on these platforms, like I believe that like the crowd actually tends towards the center in these moments. I think often too about what it means that people are being radicalized quietly, that what social media allows you to do is it allows you to process the world privately. Like you can participate in a national conversation, but just you are the only person who's there. And what does that look like when you get places like Charleston, South Carolina, where there are all these young white guys getting radicalized on Instagram and Facebook, like in the privacy of their own homes? And what are the tech platforms' responsibility in those contexts? What will it mean when hate music becomes an issue? When people make songs that are about killing and doing bad things to races and religions, like what will Spotify and Apple and Google Music do in those cases? And I think that we're actually not too far away from that. But all of this is contingent on people having access to the internet. And I'm reminded every day that there's so many marginalized people and communities that don't have any access to the internet. So maybe we should start there. Thank you.